It's the biggest game of the season so far in the Big Ten. Two undefeateds, Ohio State and Penn State, trying to take a step closer to the college football playoff. Tyler Donohue and Dave Biddle here to break down the big one. The Buckeyes have dominated this series recently, winning 6 in a row and 10 of the last 11. Meanwhile, Penn State heads to Columbus on an 11-game win streak. It's the longest since 1999. So guys, we'll start with the coaching battle here between Ryan Day and James Franklin. Neither have been able to win the Natty despite all the regular season success they've had. Perhaps it's been making Day a little bit emotional, as we saw after that Notre Dame win, but we know he's 4-0 against Penn State. Franklin, meanwhile, 1-8 against Ohio State. So Dave, we'll start with you here. What would a win mean for each coach here?
Yeah, I think there might even be more pressure on James Franklin than Ryan Day. I'm curious what Tyler thinks about that because, Ryan Day, the biggest pressure for him will be beating Michigan this year. Obviously, Ohio State wants to beat Penn State and Michigan, but if it played out that Ohio State lost to Penn State but beat Michigan, Ohio State fans maybe, in large part would take that. They would certainly take that over beating Penn State and losing for the third straight year to Michigan. Because, as you mentioned, Grace, Ohio State has done pretty well against Penn State. Ryan Day is 4-0 against Penn State. James Franklin needs to get that monkey off his back. He's just 1-8 against Ohio State, as you mentioned. And this is his most talented team. You look at any NFL mock draft, it's just littered with Penn State guys. So this is going to be a tough battle, and it means a lot for both coaches, don't get me wrong. But I think it would mean a little bit more for James Franklin than even Ryan Day.
I wouldn't disagree with that, considering James Franklin's only win in this series to this point was back in 2016. That launched a surprising Big Ten championship run, and it really set a high standard early on in James Franklin's tenure. And because they haven't been able to break through against the Buckeyes, they've had a 1-point loss in Columbus, they've had a 1-point loss in Happy Valley, Ohio. That has been magnified year by year by year. And you go back to the end of that 2018 matchup when Trace McSorley handed off to Miles Sanders and was stuffed in the backfield by Chase Young on a 4th and 6. An emotional James Franklin went in the post-game press conference and hammered home the point of wanting to go from great to elite and acknowledged that was going to require getting through the Ohio States and Michigans of the Big Ten East. To this point, they've taken some wins from Michigan. They have not done it against Ohio State. This feels like the deepest roster, the deepest coaching staff that James Franklin has brought into a matchup against Ohio State. So big question is, can he get it done, come back home 7-0, and then you get the Wolverines in Beaver Stadium next month?
Let's get into these offenses. Penn State has scored 30 points in 13 straight games, but James Franklin taking some heat last week for how he handled a question in a press conference about not throwing the deep ball. Tyler, not that they've needed it that much this season, but it is an understandable concern. But what makes you confident this offense can continue its success against the Buckeyes?
James Franklin readdressed that a bit in his press conference on Tuesday this week and saying you spend your whole life trying to teach quarterbacks to take check down throws. And they've got a quarterback who loves them in Drew Aller, and he is absolutely slicing and dicing short to intermediate range right now, using his tight end Theo Johnson, Tyler Warren, both really highly talented players at that position. Harrison Wallace is back at wide receiver, saw the most snaps of anybody at that position last week. He was missing in action for an injury for some time. And then Keandre Lambert-Smith has really stepped up as the lead target at receiver thus far. They're able to lean on the ground game, which has really gone a long way. You haven't seen the flashy numbers thus far from Nick Singleton or Katron Allen, but this is the #1 rush attack thus far in the Big Ten, over 200 yards per game. Getting it with time of possession, long, sustained drives, 8 to 12 plays. It's been with regularity. We've become so accustomed with stars like KJ Hamler and Jahan Dotson and Saquon Barkley of big plays being the key in this matchup against the Buckeyes. Right now, it may be keeping the Ohio State offense off the field and letting your offense dictate things. And thus far, that's worked. Will it work with a sophomore quarterback on the road? He's only completed about 50% of his passes on the road versus 70% in Beaver Stadium. So that's a question mark. But what we do know about Drew Aller thus far, 16 career college games, no turnovers, 15 touchdowns, no fumbles, no interceptions thus far as a starter, and that'll be tested in a big way against Ohio State.
And on the Ohio State side, Dave, obviously not the high-flying offense we're used to seeing. There were quarterback questions entering the season. Kyle McCord gets the nod, but last week we actually saw some Devin Brown in some short yardage and goal line packages. So what should we expect to see against Penn State this week?
Yeah, the Buckeyes have really struggled in short yardage and goal line situations, and they broke out the Devin Brown package, as you mentioned. And I don't think it was just window dressing against Purdue. I don't think they're going to major in it and do it, every time they're in goal line or short yardage. But it gives defensive coordinators something else to plan for. Devin Brown's a willing runner, redshirt freshman. He's not going to remind anybody of Michael Vick or anything like that. But he's a willing runner. He's, pretty athletic, and he can throw the balls. He had a really nice touchdown pass. But this is going to depend on Kyle McCord. I mean, if Devin Brown plays, it's going to be just a bit role, and still an important role, but a bit role. Kyle McCord has been a bit of a mixed bag so far, as you would expect for a first-year starter. More good than bad. The good has been he seems unflappable. He's very calm under pressure, as we saw the winning drive against Notre Dame, and that's a tough environment at Notre Dame at night. You're trailing. You have to get a touchdown in the last seconds, and he was able to do that. He's got the arm talent. He's got, you can see why Ryan Day handpicked him. He's got all the arm talent you would want. But the ball placement has left a lot to be desired at times. His timing is a little off at times. But overall, Kyle McCord is having a good year. He's taking care of the football, 11 touchdowns, 1 interception. And Grace, the 1 interception was on a 4th down play where he had to get rid of it anyway. The receiver fell down. So you almost give him a mulligan on that one because it's a 4th down play. You might as well throw it. So overall, Kyle McCord's playing well, but he hasn't seen anything close to a defense like this.
Yeah, well, you mentioned it. So let's get into the defenses. 2 of the top 3 defenses in the nation. Buckeyes have held all 6 of their opponents below 17 points, while the Nittany Lions have held their opponents below 15 points. So, Dave, starting with you, what improvements have you seen from year 1 to year 2 under Jim Knowles?
They're not giving up nearly as many big plays, and that's what really hurt them last year, especially against Michigan and Georgia. But there are even signs before that. I mean, Penn State had a lot of yards against them last year, put up some points. If not for JT Tuimoloau, just becoming Superman in the 4th quarter, Penn State might win that game last year. And then, Maryland as well last year, they're giving up big plays. So it wasn't just Michigan and Georgia, but those are the ones that hurt Ohio State the most. So this year what you're seeing is they're still aggressive, but they are, they're not giving up the big plays. Now we'll see. Again, I mean, Penn State hasn't thrown the ball down the field that much this year, but Drew Aller is able to do that. So maybe they've been saving that for Ohio State because they haven't needed to do that. Penn State's got 2 excellent running backs, as we all know. I will say this as well. So Knowles has changed his style a little bit, backing off the throttle because he's known to being very aggressive. I also think the talent is better for Ohio State's defense this year. They only lost 1 NFL draft pick off their defense from last year. That was defensive end Zach Harrison, and he was a 3rd-round pick. So they're more talented, they're more veteran, and second year of the Knowles era, you're seeing them back off the throttle a little bit while still being aggressive. So it's going to be an interesting test for Ohio State's defense against this Penn State offense.
And when it comes to Penn State's defense, I'll start with that staff as well. Manny Diaz in year number 2 as the defensive coordinator. A lot of us wondered if he'd stick around for a second season in Happy Valley. He did. It has paid dividends for both him and this defense. Very talented group. He's not afraid to use 10 defensive linemen in the first half of these matchups. Because of the scores, they've been able to get most of their starters to the sidelines for the various 4th quarters they've encountered. We're to midseason now, and people on this staff will tell you they've essentially shaved off more than a game's worth of snaps on this entire defense because of the way they've handled their personnel, because of the way the offense has handled the football. They are number 1 right now in pass defense, run defense, sacks, and total defense in the Big Ten. And I know the Buckeyes bring their own impressive D to the field, but it has been complimentary football for Penn State, and that goes to the defensive side. You'll see 25 players at least out there defensively by design for Manny Diaz. They got 3 elite pass rushers, but they have 5 defensive ends that they rotate in. And I think they're going to really try and get pressure on Kyle McCord. Can they use Chop Robinson as an interior rusher? A nice little wrinkle we've seen of late with Adiza Isaac and Denai Dennis Sutton on the perimeter defensive end. It has worked thus far, but it's worked against some lower level opponents. So Manny Diaz, I know he's been licking his chops to unveil some new tricks out of the sleeve, and this is the perfect setting to do it against Columbus and a first-year starting quarterback on the other side of the football.
All right, we've covered pretty much everything in this game, but guys, if you could pick one key to the game, what would it be? And Tyler, you can start us off here.
This was a surprise, and it wasn't on my radar this time last week, but Daquan Hardy, a fifth-year cornerback for Penn State, is a third-year starter in slot coverage. He took 2 punt returns back to the house against UMass last Saturday in homecoming. No one has ever done that in a game in Penn State history. No one's ever returned more than 2 punts in a single season in Penn State history, and what makes this even more amazing is it was his first game in year 5 playing punt return position. He's never returned a punt in college football. He took 2 to the house last Saturday. So they like what Caden Saunders brings there. He's a Columbus native. He's a former top 100 wide receiver. He's been the primary punt returner. But James Franklin told us this week they can't ignore what they saw take place. Daquan Hardy is a dynamic playmaker. He has got a couple interceptions in Big Ten play this year, but I'm going to be keeping a close eye. Can he change the field position? Can he even maybe spring one and give Penn State the ball in Ohio State territory? That's the kind of moment in this matchup that could swing things.
For Ohio State, the key to victory, I mean, there's a lot of keys, but I think the biggest key to victory for Ohio State is, can they run the ball effectively against this excellent Penn State defense? Ohio State, 92nd in the country in rushing offense, yards per game, 92nd in the country. Penn State, the number 2 rushing defense in the country, the number 1 total defense in the country. And, Ohio State struggled, not necessarily because of their running backs, really because of their offensive line. It's a very green offensive line. They lost 3 NFL draft picks off that offensive line. They played better last week against Purdue, but Purdue has not been good against anybody against the run. So, that doesn't really tell you very much. So it's going to be Ohio State's ability to run the ball. If Penn State's able to stuff the run, and then they're going to be able to get after Kyle McCord, it's going to be a long afternoon for the Buckeyes. If the Buckeyes can establish the run, stay on schedule, take a little bit of pressure off McCord, then the Buckeyes can win this game. They have to be able to run the ball at least somewhat effectively against this outstanding Penn State defense to be able to win this game.
All right, this monster game kicks off at noon on Saturday. Thank you, Dave and Tyler. And for more game coverage, check out Lions 24/7 and Bucknuts.com, your Penn State and Ohio State football and recruiting news all season long.